Hi. On today's episode, we take a look at a man who many consider as the first billionaire in the world. A man so wealthy in his days, many still think he would have still featured on today's annual Forbes 400 list of the wealthiest Americans if he were still alive. Ranking highest on this Forbes list are familiar names like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk, who tops the 2022 list with a net worth of $251 billion. But a century before these tech and financial giants, there was John Davison Rockefeller, a man who at his peak grossed up assets equaling 1.5% of America's total economic output. More on that later. This is the story of the business mogul who co-founded the now defunct Standard Oil Company, which was once the largest petroleum company in the world, and who found his biggest success and became a billionaire as kerosene and gasoline grew in importance. At its prime, his company, Standard Oil Company, controlled 90% of all oil in the United States. This is a man whose money-making abilities have been idolized by Wall Street. But as you would expect of most successful people, his journey wasn't all that rosy. This was a man who garnered both admirers and critics during his lifetime and after his death, with some accusing him of indulging in unethical business practices in order to make his riches. We'll also get more on that later. This is a very interesting story of a man described by some as well-behaved, serious, and studious as a boy, whose goal as a young adult was to make $100,000, but who managed to surpass this financial goal to become the world's first billionaire. How did he do it? Well, this is what we're about to find out right now. This is the inspiring story of John Davison Rockefeller. John Davison Rockefeller, born on July 8, 1839, to William Avery Rockefeller and Eliza Davison in Richford, New York, was the eldest son and second of 6 children. His father, who owned agricultural property and traded in many commodities, including timber and patent medicine, identified himself as a quote-unquote botanic physician. And his mother, who was the complete opposite of his father's cheerful personality, raised the large family very strictly. One could safely attribute Rockefeller's entrepreneurial skills from what he learned from both his father and mother. Despite being notorious for conducting schemes and living a philandering and double life, which included bigamy, Rockefeller's father, Bill, taught his children to, quote-unquote, trade dishes for platters and always get the better part of any deal. Rockefeller's father would even brag about cheating his boys every chance he gets, just so as to, in quotes, make them sharp. Though Rockefeller wasn't that close to his father, he once stated, and I quote, "From the beginning, I was trained to work, to save, and to give." Rockefeller's mother, who was more influential to Rockefeller's upbringing and even beyond, taught him to be frugal. And while at home, the young and business-minded John, who did his routine household chores, would start raising money for himself by raising turkeys, selling potatoes and candy, and doing jobs for neighbors. And it wasn't long before he eventually started lending money to neighbors. By the age of 12, he had saved more than $50 working for his neighbors and raising turkeys for his mother. At his mother's request, he lent a local farmer $50 at an interest rate of 7% payable in 1 year. When the farmer paid back with interest the following year, Rockefeller was impressed and said in 1904, and I quote, "The impression was gaining ground with me that it was a good thing to let the money be my servant and not make myself a slave to the money." As a young boy, Rockefeller would attend a number of different schools, given the fact that his family used to move a lot. Like Oswego Academy, which he attended in 1851 when his family moved from Moravia to Oswego in New York. He would later go on to attend the first high school in Cleveland when his family moves to Strongsville in Ohio in 1853. After graduating from high school, where he excelled in mathematics, he would then enroll for an accounting course at Folsom's Commercial College, but would later drop out after just 10 weeks. In August 1855, at the age of 16, he would go job hunting for an accounting or bookkeeping position in Cleveland. Business was bad in Cleveland at the time, and Rockefeller would have trouble finding work. He was always neatly dressed in a dark suit and black tie. In 1855, Cleveland wasn't a big city, and Rockefeller could easily visit every business in less than a week. He returned to many businesses 3 times. Finally, on September 26, 1855, he got a position as assistant bookkeeper with Hewitt and Tuttle, a commission merchant and produce shipping company which bought, sold, and shipped grain, coal, and other commodities. It is worthy of note that Rockefeller considered September 26th the day he started his job and entered the business world, so important that as an adult, he celebrated this job day with an annual celebration. Rockefeller quickly impressed his employers with his seriousness and diligence. He was very demanding and extremely honest. For example, under no circumstances will he issue a forged bill of lading. He concluded complex shipping contracts, which usually included the transport of a single load of goods by rail, canal, or seagoing vessel. He was particularly good at calculating transportation costs, which greatly helped him later in his career. Much of Rockefeller's duties involved negotiating with barge canal owners, captains, and freight agents. During these negotiations, he learned that the supposedly fixed listed rates could be changed based on the conditions and timing of the freight and through the use of a preferred customer discount or rebate. Rockefeller was also tasked with collecting debt when his boss requested it. Instead of using his father's roll call method to collect debts, Rockefeller used persistence and harassment. Later, he began to engage in trading ventures on his own account. Being a naturally cautious person that he was by nature, Rockefeller would only embark on a business venture if he was confident it would be successful. After carefully considering the plan of action, he would act quickly and boldly to implement it. He had iron nerves and performed very complex operations without hesitation. This combination of prudence, precision, and determination quickly earned him the attention and respect of the Cleveland business community. With the meager 50 cents he made per day on this first job, Rockefeller would then be able to save up and also get a loan from his father to create his first company. This marked the beginning of the birth of a business magnate never before seen in modern history. Four years later, in 1859, Rockefeller would be approached by a young Englishman called Maurice Clark with a partnership idea that would change Rockefeller's life forever. Clark offered $2,000 towards this goal, whilst Rockefeller raised $1,800, with $800 coming from his savings and $1,000 from a loan he took from his dad at an interest rate of 10%. Together, they raised a sum of $4,000 towards a commodities brokerage business. A commission business dealing in hay, grain, meats, and other goods called Clark and Rockefeller. Despite commission merchant business being very competitive at the time, Rockefeller and his partner had made $17,000 by the second year of business. The business's success was attributed in large part to Rockefeller's natural business abilities. During the American Civil War of 1861, their business grew rapidly. As grain prices went up, so did their commissions. Most of their selling was on commission, thereby minimizing to zero any risks associated with price fluctuations. Rockefeller's style was precise and calculated. He avoided speculation. Rockefeller worked extremely hard. He traveled extensively, doing business all over Ohio, then went to the banks and borrowed large sums of money to handle the shipments. This aggressive style would make the company grow year after year. In the early 1860s, however, Rockefeller would later realize that the future of the Cleveland commission business would be limited and would be convinced that the railroad would become the main means of transporting agricultural goods. This would be to the disadvantage of Cleveland, as Lake Erie's location as the main port was its main transportation advantage. He saw that J.J. Hill's increasing grain production in the Midwest and Northwest would change the nature of the business forever. The giant silos in Lake Michigan and the flour mills in Minneapolis would be the dominant players in the business. Rockefeller believed that Cleveland's future lies in the collection and transportation of raw industrial materials, not agricultural products. This would allow Cleveland to exploit its geographical advantage, given that it is located between the eastern seaboard and Chicago and accessible by both rail and water transportation. Later on, Rockefeller saw his chance in 1863, and that was in oil.
Rockefeller's entry into oil refining follows, I think, a careful analysis of the commodity by Rockefeller himself. He saw the potential in this. Its lighting capability was much higher than candles or campheine or sperm oil, and he probably saw the potential.
From the start, Rockefeller showed a genius for organization and method. The firm prospered during the Civil War, when Confederate, from the South, forces clashed with those of the Union, who were from the North. With the Pennsylvania oil strike in 1859 and the building of a railroad to Cleveland, they branched out into oil refining with Samuel Andrews, who had technical knowledge of the field. Within 2 years, Rockefeller became senior partner. Clark was bought out, and the firm Rockefeller and Andrews became Cleveland's largest refinery. With financial help from S.V. Harkness and from a new partner, H.M. Flagler, who also secured favorable railroad freight rebates, Rockefeller survived the bitter competition in the oil industry. The Standard Oil Company, started in Ohio in 1870 by Rockefeller, his brother William, Flagler, Harkness, and Andrews, had a worth of $1 million and made a profit of 40% a year later. While Standard Oil controlled 1/10 of American refining, the competition remained. Rockefeller still hoped to control the oil industry. He bought out most of the Cleveland refineries, as well as others in New York, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. He turned to new transportation methods, including the railroad tank car and the pipeline. By 1879, he was refining 90% of American oil, and the company used its own tank car fleet, ships, docking facilities, barrel-making plants, depots, and warehouses. Rockefeller came through the Panic of 1873, a severe financial crisis, still urging organization of the refiners. As his control approached near monopoly, he fought a war with the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1877, which created a refining company to try to break Rockefeller's control. But bloody railroad strikes that year forced them to surrender to Standard Oil. Rockefeller's dream of order was near completion. In Rockefeller's eyes, the state of the oil business was chaotic. Because entry costs were so low in both oil drilling and oil refining, the market was glutted with crude oil with an accompanying high level of waste. In his view, the theory of free competition did not work well when there was a mix of very large, efficient firms and many medium and small firms. His view was that the weak firms, in their attempts to survive, drove prices down below production costs, hurting even the well-managed firms, such as his own. Although his economics may be suspect in modern eyes, his solution, a market with a few, maybe one, large vertically integrated firms, in effect an oligopolistic market, was what other industrial sectors eventually evolved into. What makes oil stand out is that it happened by design, as the result of a plan formulated by a single person, John D. Rockefeller. During 1871, Rockefeller formulated his plan for consolidating all oil refining firms into one great organization with the aim of eliminating excess capacity and price cutting. Although no written records exist, both Rockefeller and Flagler 30 years later claimed this was when they worked out the master plan, which they later implemented. The claim that the plan was formulated in 1871 is evidenced by the fact that all the major Cleveland banks joined the Standard Oil organization in 1871 and later backed Rockefeller and Flagler to the hilt in their rapid expansion. By March or April 1872, Rockefeller had bought up and/or merged with almost all the refineries in Cleveland. The inefficient and poorly constructed refineries were dismantled, while the better quality ones were upgraded to Rockefeller and Flagler standards. Within the first 3 months of 1872, he had bought out, shut down, or bankrupted 22 of his 26 Cleveland competitors. After the conquest of Cleveland, Standard Oil Company inexorably expanded. an expansion that was largely criticized as fraudulent and unethical. Unsympathetic to goodwill pricing, Rockefeller offered a fair market price to refineries that were losing money because of outdated equipment. However, as muckrake journalists later pointed out, the refineries were losing money because of the Standard Oil monopoly. Muckrake journalists were reform-minded journalists, writers and photographers in the progressive era between the 1890s and the 1920s in the United States, who claimed to expose corruption and wrongdoing in established institutions, often through sensationalist publications. The modern term generally references investigative journalism or watchdog journalism. Its sheer size meant that Standard Oil, unlike other refineries, was able to negotiate a railroad rebate by promising to deliver 60 tanker wagons a day, which appealed to railroad owners wanting to maintain a high and steady volume. These train rebates helped Standard Oil keep transportation costs low. Other refineries could not compete. A consortium of oil and railroad magnates proposed a deal to fix transportation costs, known as the Southern Improvement Company, but public outcry soon led to further negotiations being called off. In 1882, the Standard Oil Trust established a nationwide network of Standard Oil companies, headed by a board of trustees, where Rockefeller owned more than a third of the certificates. By the late 1880s, Standard Oil controlled 90% of America's refineries. This market control, coupled with the Southern Innovation Company scandal, attracted the attention of politicians who began to pass antitrust laws and ban train rebates. Rockefeller had a strict rule not to speak to the press, which did nothing to counter journalist Ida Tarbell's harsh and widely disseminated critique of Standard Oil. Rockefeller finally retired from day-to-day operations in 1895 at the age of 56, but retained a figurehead role as chairman. In 1911, the Supreme Court found that Standard Oil had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. As a result, Standard Oil was split into 34 independent companies, although over time, the descendants of this company developed into large integrated oil companies that still dominate the market, such as ExxonMobil. The Supreme Court case also hadn't slowed Rockefeller's wealth. 1916 newspaper headlines claimed that he was the world's first billionaire. By the end of the 19th century, the size and hierarchy of management had expanded to some of the major industries of the American economy. Although the exact mechanisms are often different, the process mainly involves horizontal integration, some form of legal or administrative centralization, followed by vertical integration. Standard Oil is a prime example of this development. The history of Standard Oil is also closely linked to the life and career of John D. Rockefeller, one of the most famous individuals who defined the American business scene. Rockefeller is largely remembered simply for the raw size of his wealth. In 1902, an audit showed Rockefeller was worth about $200 million, compared to the total national GDP of $24 billion then. And in 1913, his personal wealth was $900 million, which was worth $23.5 billion, adjusted for inflation in 2020. While in 1937, his estimated net worth of $1.4 billion was equivalent to 1.5% of the total wealth of the United States, which was estimated at $92 billion that year. To put this into more context, as a percentage of the United States GDP, no other American fortune, including those of Bill Gates or Sam Walton, would even come close. In comparison, Bill Gates's wealth in 2018 was 0.45% of 2018 GDP. By this metric, Rockefeller was, and still is, the wealthiest individual in the history of business and the American economy. John Davison Rockefeller's commitment to philanthropy created a lasting legacy. Rockefeller gave away more than $540 million in his lifetime, including funding medical research, poverty alleviation in the South, and educational efforts for African Americans. He died on May 23, 1937, at the age of 97 at Ormond Beach, Florida.
Let us, with faith in God, in ourselves, and in humanity, go forward courageously resolved to play our part worthily in building a better world.
And this story was money related. Thank you for watching this episode. Until the next one, see you around.